Hello and welcome to Philippa Squared. I'm Philippa Scott and I have my beautiful co-host Pippa Cox with me. Good morning, Pippa.
Good morning. How are you this beautiful sunny day? It's sunny on the Sunshine Coast. I
I
love
have
it.
short sleeves on. I
Oh,
got
I'm still
hot
under my
before.
blanket. I'm still under my blanket. It's an early morning here today. Now, I think we're going to have a pretty cool conversation today, Philippa.
I do.
I
I do
think it's
believe you're right.
going to be talking about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad. Sorry, I
Yeah,
don't
please.
want to. I'll can that right now, okay? But we're talking about sex
We
with this
are.
lovely, beautiful Sofia Fontaine. Sofia, welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to
You're,
be here.
it's exciting, isn't it? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure.
Yeah, you've got a strange
Yeah.
accent there, girl. Whereabouts are you from?
I live all the way up in Canada on the other side of the world, at northern Canada as well. So next, I say we're Alaska's cheeky neighbor in Whitehorse, Yukon. I've got family down in Australia and got to go for the first time last November and visit Canberra and the coast. So that was pretty lovely. And I am a sex coach for parents. So I run a company called the Happy Vagina Project and a program called Sex After Kids. I am a mom and a stepmom myself, living in a very neuro-spicy house. And I, like everyone I work with, is just trying to keep my libido and my relationship alive and thriving in the very busy days of childhood and midlife.
Beautiful. Now, you were telling me a little bit before we actually got on this call how you got into this space. Are you able
Mhm.
to explain that a little bit for our listeners? And so that, and
Happily.
basically, and so we've got some context into how
For sure.
amazing you actually are.
Well, so the Happy Vagina Project originally started because I spent my 20s, quote unquote, at war with my vagina. So I was struggling to orgasm with most of my partners, especially after a month or two. I spent one period with one partner in particular, constantly at the doctors, constantly bacterial vaginosis, yeast infection, and was almost diagnosed with like vulvodynia or vaginismus, which is painful intercourse where your vagina literally like shuts down at the thought of intercourse and locks up. And so I spent most of my 20s in an adversarial relationship with my vagina, with my body, saying things like, "What's wrong with you? Why aren't you cooperating with me? What's your problem? Why can't you get with the party?" And also kind of like on the search for the grand orgasm. I was in this workshop and I just said like are soul touching, moon touching, universe touching orgasms like even a thing? And this lovely woman in her 60s like raised her hand and was like, when my mind and my body are that expansive, like my orgasms can be that expansive, like for sure. Yes, they do exist. And so it wasn't until I clued in and I can't even quite remember the entire path, but I started to realize that the level of dissatisfaction I was experiencing in the bedroom may be correlating to the level of dissatisfaction I was experiencing in my career and in my personal life. At the time, I was single, desperately wanted a baby, approaching my 30s. And I was like, what's the common thread here? And went down this path of turning point was reading Naomi Wolf's Vagina, a New Biography, and learning about the connection for vagina owners in particular about how the patriarchy has us disconnected from pleasure, disconnected from our bodies, disconnected from this most intimate part of our body. And that disconnects us ultimately from our power and our voice. And so when we can reclaim that, we can reclaim so much. And what I
Okay.
learned was talking to my body and being friends with it, hence the Happy Vagina Project, was the path forward in all areas of my life, right?
Wow. Okay. So can we just pause here and just unpack a little bit of that? That is huge. So what were you talking about having an adversarial relationship with your vagina, realizing that some of what you were experiencing mentally and emotionally actually impacted on your sexual life as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, I didn't know my vagina at all. So if I think of my vagina as this like friend that I've had my entire life, right? What does that journey of our friendship looked like? So I had like decent sex ed, but wasn't encouraged to masturbate or touch myself or explore a lot when I was younger. So I have this person in my life that I don't even really know what she looks like. I don't know what she enjoys, what her favorite movie is, what her favorite snack is, what kind of touch she likes, right? Um, it's hard to look at your vagina. Like men or people with penises have such an external relationship with this organ. And I always joke for people with vaginas, it's like you need an army of mirrors and lights, and like you need to almost be a contortionist to like actually even see your vulva. um, and to understand the internal anatomy, right? So like we're almost physically just disconnected from it on that level. And then I think on an emotional level, it's this disconnect from pleasure, not being allowed to have pleasure, not being allowed to have rest, shame around sexual pleasure. And in particular for women, naughtiness around that, we're supposed to be pure and virginal and innocent and all these things. And our white knight is supposed to introduce us to those things, and sex is supposed to be just for making babies too, right? So it was kind of this really potent cocktail of like, the sex ed that we do or don't get. I mean, even the amount of anatomy learning we get is very focused on reproduction, and nobody talks about the 5 different erogenous zones, how much erectile
What?
tissue
You mean
we
there's more than
have.
one? There's more than
Yeah.
one erogenous zone?
And like why it takes vulvas and vaginas about 20 minutes to warm up fully. Like there's just so much how your libido actually even works, and why you're struggling because you just expect it to magically turn on. I mean, step number
But
one in
isn't
so
that,
much of all of
but
this is that.
But Sophia, isn't that what Hollywood says that is what sex is
Mm,
about? Like
mm.
you just meet and you just have this massive, huge attraction towards each other, and then you add it so quickly and you're
No
orgasming within
talking.
10 seconds, I believe.
I'm always, there's no time for, I always joke that healthy relationships and healthy sexuality like don't make for good TV because there's no drama in them.
Yeah, it's all about drama,
Right?
isn't it?
And
Yeah.
so we've got, a complete lack of sex ed. And then the sex ed we do get is either porn on the one hand, which has its own issues, even though there's nothing problematic with watching porn itself. Um, or we have movies, none of which model communication, none of which typically model consent, none of which model women being like in charge of and in control of their sexuality and knowing what they want. It's all about, an unfair load on your man too, if we're sticking in the binary for a moment, of him knowing everything and just grabbing you and magically pleasing you without any words or conversation about what it is that you like. And
Yeah. That's why I've
great
got a bit of a
sex,
problem with porn. I've got a
right? And
big problem with
masterful
pornography.
sex
Yeah.
is nothing like that.
Yeah. And it's just a
Nothing like
shame
that.
that pornography is just so out there now and so available. And young
Mm.
people, we've had this conversation before, haven't we, Philippa, with other
Yeah.
people on the podcast, where kids are learning from ways that aren't realistic. It's
At
all
all. And
dramatized.
increasingly violent and yeah,
Yeah.
all the things.
But if we just kind of go on to how sexuality and sex impacts on someone who is trying to get pregnant, someone who's pregnant, and
Hmm.
particularly after they've had their babies.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of women, when they're pregnant, find that their libido goes up,
Yep.
which is interesting, isn't it?
Fascinating.
And then with the complications from their partner maybe not understanding their sexuality. Are you able to just talk about that for a little bit? Because, and what women, like what is normal, what's not normal, and how women can actually negotiate this with their partners. We'll talk about pregnancy first, and then we'll go on to after the baby's born, because I know that's massive. And
Yeah.
and I know you know a lot about the nervous system and stuff.
How do
Because that
we address
to
that?
me
Yeah.
is fascinating, because if you know the why, and with the way that I think and the way that a lot of people think, if you know the why, the how is a lot easier,
Very true.
isn't it?
Yeah. So I find one of the biggest things is yeah, we want to attach ourselves to some kind of normal in terms of like what amount of sex should we be having, what's considered normal, what is a normal sex drive. And I actually just shared a blog post the other day about how even the notion of sex drive and even the notion of low libido, of course, like everything that we're really digging up around health these days, like low compared to what? Low compared to the male hetero norm that we've established as the baseline for everything, right? And so people with vaginas and uteruses are cyclical beings. We've got a hormone cycle that's over 28 days that absolutely affects our drive and our libido for sex. When you're pregnant, all of that has shifted and is out the window in different ways. And I always like to think of whether we're talking through the fertility, IVF, etc. journey, whether we're talking actually through physical pregnancy or whether we're talking afterwards, there's a couple of buckets of or categories where things shift. And the first is physically, right? So literally physically, you're either being pumped through with a bunch of hormones constantly at the doctor's office, poked and prodded, etc. Or your body is growing, changing, your ligaments are shifting, your hormones are shifting, your sleep is shifting, all that stuff. And then post kids, you've got, a year plus, which we totally don't tell people. People think they're just supposed to be recovered after 6 weeks, but a year plus of something now came out of the hole in my body. And there might be tearing, there might be scar tissue, there might be C-section. There may be breastfeeding, not breastfeeding, right? So all of these factors that fit into the like physical bucket that can absolutely impact your desire to have sex, increasing it or decreasing it, right? And then we can add on to that things like neurodiversity or autoimmune. I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's after my second baby, which had a huge amount to do with my low libido after my second baby, which was very different than after my first. So there's that physical bucket of things, and so many of them people don't know about. The medication you're on, right? Birth control. And so a lot of people are banging their heads against the wall going, why is my libido different than it used to be, when they don't even know the physical factors that could be impacting it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the second big bucket is kind of relationship. And I kind of divide that into relationship to self and relationship to partner, right? So your identity shifts a lot, and the cultural messaging around that identity, and whether mothers get to be sexual beings and who they get to be sexual beings in front of. Like a lot of people who didn't have shame about sex will start to feel very uncomfortable flirting with their partner in front of their children or making out with the bassinet next to the bed. Like new shames, judgments, like mindsets around sex can come up as our identity shifts because the cultural messaging around sexuality can change. And then, of course, we've got like body image. If we're dealing with postpartum depression, like all that kind of mental health stuff is a huge factor, as well as your relationship with your partner. So you may have gone from having all the time in the world with each other, being just this dyad, you and them, to you've welcomed a third or a fourth or a fifth person into the relationship, into the bed, for those of us who have bed sharing going on. I haven't slept in the same bed with my partner. I don't even know, because we're all just playing rotating beds every night, right? And that's coming to an end. I can taste it. So all of a sudden you have less time for each other, you have less energy for each other, especially when you've got your first, you're navigating new skills, which makes everyone vulnerable, grumpy. You're both tired, you're both stressed out. And we have a society that can be so, I assume it's similar in Australia, maybe not, but very children focused in kind of the West, where we sort of forget to put the oxygen mask on ourselves and on our relationships first, before being able to, care for our children in the best way possible. So all throughout all of that, we have all of these pieces. And I think the normal is things will change. And the normal is you are likely not going back to an exact replica of your relationship, of your life, of your sex life before children and before pregnancy. And the normal is accepting that and embracing how things work now and creating what's going to work for you now, and knowing that will shift through each season of parenting, through each season of your life, through other major changes as well. Did that answer your question, Pippa?
Yeah.
It's very interesting having been become a mum at 26 and having had what I would have considered a very healthy libido prior to children, to then being, I had a C-section for my first baby, and really interesting, after my second child, it was actually because she was born vaginally, and even though I had a tear, every part of my erogenous zones worked better. And in fact, I was able to feel into that space in a way that I couldn't prior to having had a vaginal birth. It was like things switched on.
So cool.
It was cool. But then, of course, I had a lot of other children in a very short period of time. And so you become very tired. And things do change too, because consent, it's really quite interesting. I've recently read Chanel Contis, her book called Consent Laid Bare, and it's a story of her discovery, essentially, around consent and rape culture and all of those sorts of things. And it's absolutely fascinating read, and I encourage anyone who's a parent to read it, because you've got a lot of educating to do for your children, well, no matter what gender they are, or what sex they are. They need to have this information, and we need to understand rape culture. And it was really interesting to me listening to that from a birth trauma therapist hat as well, and thinking, man, we are setting these teenage girls up for the obstetric violence they're going to receive later, because they don't understand consent and how that should look. And so we're simply setting them up for birth trauma later. And one of the interesting things that I think is missing is that renegotiation of consent, that renegotiation of what does this look like for me, and the when we are coming from a space of trauma, which most of us are, right? When most of us will have had at least something crap happen in our life, we as women, fight, flight, freeze is not, or freeze is often where we're going to go in the moment, but we are very heavily conditioned to fawn, and it's part conditioning, right? Because we see it all around us, and it's part our physical makeup to do, because it keeps us safe. And so we tend to, in our relationships after children, think, well, and I've been there, well, if I just let him do it, I'm off the hook for another few days, right? And you're going to stop bothering me about this, right? Because I just don't feel like it. And then we get to menopause or perimenopause, and we don't have a 28-day cycle anymore. We don't know what our cycle's doing anymore. So it's all over the shop. And so there are so many different aspects that are going to come into all of this. And I think the one thing that I've learned recently, since doing my own trauma work, is to simply honor whatever my body is telling me.
Yes.
To honor whether I feel like it or don't, and just not, and fuck feeling guilty about it.
Totally.
I'm done.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I do not feel guilty about that at all. If my body says no, it's a fuck no.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's so true. And this is like, when we've got, the physical, the emotional, all that stuff, I typically find the breakdown for people when they're like, what's going on with my libido? And like, why don't I want sex? Is there's a nervous system piece. So for some people, and they're all interrelated, right? But there's a very big nervous system piece. There's a communication with your partner piece, which links back to nervous system because that's how we create safety. There's a mindset piece. So all the cultural messaging and the things that we believe about sex. And there's a relationship to pleasure piece, which is actually about your nervous system's ability to like handle pleasure. And that was a big part of my issue when in my earlier days before I switched to the focus on kids, was like orgasm felt like too much goodness for my body to handle. And so my body would like freak out and shut it down. And I couldn't allow the pleasure to like move in and through my body. And that totally comes from my trauma and whatever it is that I've got going on, right? But that was such an interesting piece. And the nervous system piece is so key for me because it shows up or is triggered, for lack of a better word, by so many different things, right? There's what's the state of your relationship and like how safe does your body feel, not your brain. So I have a very loving partner. I have a very woke, quote unquote, partner. I have a partner that I feel intellectually very safe with. But if my body has associated sex as a danger time from previous experiences, we together have to work extra hard to support my body to know that this can be a safe time, right? Same thing, but if we're not communicating well and we're on edge a little bit, then my nervous system is up in that fight or flight place. And then I end up being in freeze, right? Where my partner comes up behind me, tries to make a move. My body goes, oh, I have to put out now. I skip all the making out and foreplay and everything, go all the way to the end. And I have found myself in moments where I'm frozen between half wanting to or half wanting to at least explore if I want to and half not wanting to and not knowing how to proceed and literally being stuck and frozen there and not being able to say anything or communicate, right?
Yeah, the freeze it's huge. The freeze.
It's huge. And I wonder...
Men don't always even know it's there, right? Like they don't even know what's going on behind the nothing.
Totally.
And they forget, and they forget, we talked about this a while ago, didn't we, Pippa, that they forget that the absence of no is not yes.
Yeah.
Or they never
but I was like,
told.
Isn't that funny that we call women who don't want to have sex frigid?
Oh, yes, that goes on with the societal expectations and the societal
because we're frozen.
Oh,
right.
And we're frozen for a reason,
Yes.
And the interesting thing is that if there's communication is key, isn't it? And the older I get, then now that I'm in a very significant relationship, I'm realizing these conversations that we were so scared of having are actually really, really good, and they clear the air.
Yeah.
And they send your relationship to a different level, to a much deeper level.
Well, and it's working through the conflict and the scariness. I mean, I always think back to, and again, this is not the case for everybody. There are people in unsafe relationships. There are people in relationships with partners who are totally stonewalling them and just don't get it. That is a thing for sure. And also, I think there are a lot of like otherwise healthy couples who don't understand this level of nuance to consent is a 3-part process. It's me tuning in and being able to go, I would like this thing right now, or I am willing to offer this thing right now, and then vocalizing it. And then my partner doing the same thing on their side and saying, are they willing to do the thing that I wanted or whatever? And then us doing the thing and communicating and observing while they're there. And it takes being in your body, present, relaxed, and focused. And so the other nervous system piece is how stressed we are all. We are all in flight most of the time anyways, just in the society. And most of the parents I talk to feel like they're drowning in dual income households with no village. That's a whole other podcast topic.
Yeah.
And there's the sensory overwhelm from being in a household, certainly with multiples. I don't think I really experienced being truly touched out until I had a second child. And I have a stepson in my house who's 13 too. And so like I can't even handle being in the bathroom right now when the bath is running because the sound, the echo is so loud. And I notice I do a lot more yelling in the bathroom just because my nervous system is overwhelmed from the sensory sensations that are happening during bath time, especially when the water is running. And so whether it's that relationship piece, whether it's relationships to yourself and how many times you've self-abandoned because you've done something that you didn't want to do, or you were wondering, like I did, I don't know if you folks are familiar with Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent work. It's fabulous, fabulous touch work. And I'll share my quiz at the end, but people can do a sample of it if they want. But it's this experiment with, oh, now I've lost my train of thought. Just the level of attunement of, okay, I'm back. Let's say I ask you, Pippa, to massage your back, right?
Mhm.
So I could just say, can I massage your back? And you might be like, yeah, sure. And then you go down and you lie on your back and I start massaging and my hands are moving. And maybe in my head, I'm going, oh, I wonder if I can wrap my hands kind of around the side of her body near where her breasts are. And I have no idea if you've consented to that or want that. And in my head, I'm going, can I do this? Can I not do this? And maybe you're feeling my hands moving kind of wider and wider and closer to some zones that are a little sexy. And in your mind, you're going, do I want this? I don't know if I want this. I didn't get permission for that. There wasn't like a clear sandbox
Mhm.
for what kind of touch I was going to offer and where exactly it was going to be. And so there's a level of granularity that we can play with that's actually fun. Like we don't have to think of this as all serious and boring. Like it can be fun to say like, can I karate chop your back gently, from the top of your neck down to the base of your spine? That's a way more specific ask and your body can give a clearer yes or no to that. And then once we get started, you know exactly what to expect. And I know exactly where I can allow myself to play with abandon and get lost without worrying that I'm going to like cross some line somewhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I love that concept of actually bringing fun into a fun activity.
Really? It's supposed to be fun.
And being okay with that and being okay, particularly with the communication and the exploration with your partner. Because one of the things, and we were talking about this during our initial talk, is you've got a husband and wife and their family, and the more kids you have, how on earth do you fit sex in? And particularly with the chief caregiver, who is basically a woman, they make octopuses look lazy. Being pulled in so many different directions and just enjoying, just being that leader in the family. And then, you want sex on top of that as well. When my libido has gone out of the corner, it's down the road. I think it's even waiting to catch a bus while I am really willing and and ready to take care of my family, basically. Do you think I've got any extra time or effort or notion about sex? And I get this a lot from women who are talking about that I just don't want to have sex anymore and I'm feeling pressured by my husband. And so I just roll over and go, yeah, just do it. I'm just going to self-abandon myself and do it, because they are really afraid that if I don't, the husband's going to go and get his significance elsewhere, because it's all about that need for significance, isn't it? When you're in a relationship, the partner's got to feel as significant as they were, even though you're with the other kids and your primary function and attention is towards your kids.
Totally.
So what are some tips that you can give people to navigate that?
Yeah. So I mean, part of it is mindset a little bit, and part of it is season, right? Like there are seasons for sure where sex may just need to be off the table or a once every 4 months kind of a thing. And this is where I mean about getting more comfortable. And this is there's the nervous system piece and even feeling comfortable talking about it, but negotiating what does sex look like for us right now? You want it every day. I want it never. What kind of agreement can we make that's going to serve us right now that's better than me just caving every 3 days and having a shitty time and then wanting it even less and doing damage to our relationship and to my nervous system and to my desire for sex by doing that, right? And I think I shared with you, like when I first met my partner, he had a 4-year-old. And so I went from having a sex life with my previous partners that typically included sex multiple times a day, most of the time, to not that because I had a partner with a neurodivergent child who had just been single parenting, who was more like had the woman, the lead caregiver role. So his nervous system was fried, all the things. And so we had to negotiate what was going to work for us. And I was the higher libido person in that moment, right? And then we had my first daughter. And I would say I probably was dealing with some postpartum anxiety. He was a second-time parent. I was a first-time parent, breastfeeding issues, all the things. And lots of, we were pretty on edge, lots of resentment around chores and like those kinds of things, which I think people discredit how much a sense of equality in your relationship contributes to your desire to have sex, right? There's that need to feel supported. And like what you were just talking about there, if it just feels like another chore and another thing I'm doing for other people, I'm not really into it, right? But in that phase, we kind of realized through experimentation that maintenance sex was good enough for us at that time. So once a month, someone had to tap someone else on the shoulder and go, "It's time." And it wasn't fancy. It was pretty basic, but that was enough for both of us, and it would ease the tension and allow us to feel connected again and all that stuff. And now that I've had my third or my second baby, this time around maintenance sex is doing damage for me. So I need quality, not frequency. And I'm needing new and novel right now. I'm needing toys. I'm needing lingerie. I'm needing like different experiences. And so we've just had to walk our way through all of that. So the first piece is really just trying to challenge yourself to get more comfortable negotiating your sex life. And one of the easiest ways into that is to listen to a podcast like this or a TED Talk or read a book on sex and share it with your partner and talk about sex and sexuality as like in the abstract. So not about your specific sex life to start, but just about a concept you're learning about. And then that can like grease the wheels to start to go, how can we apply that concept into our life? Like, let's learn about the dual control model. Oh, okay. Like, here's how your libido is working. Like, what can we do about that? Right. I think the other piece is definitely looking at the equity in your relationship. So even though that feels very unrelated to your sex life, it's hugely related. Or just even how you initiate and how you transition your partner into sex, right? So if my partner gets a sitter, runs a bath, and goes through kind of what I call like a pre-launch checklist where he like knows there's certain music that turns me on, a certain smell that works for me. If I have a bath or if we watch a show or something together, all of those things are going to facilitate my nervous system to transition out of busy mom mode and into maybe ready mode. I'm going to feel way more supported and more likely. And so part of that is also taking the pressure off and doing what I call naked, sexy, fun time,
I
which
love
is,
that. Naked
we're
fun
just going to get naked and
time.
have fun together. And if we do that with no goal for orgasms or intercourse, we're way more likely to get there. And so my partner have played like strip poker together, and then the babysitter called us and the baby was up and we had to go home, but we had a really fun connected time playing strip poker together. And so when that intimacy is missing, that connection is missing, this sex gets hard to get to. And I think the biggest struggle is when we let that go too long, right? So there are seasons where there may not be sex or may not be much sex or may not be much intercourse. But if we let that go a very long time without ever talking about it, and we let the intimacy part go too, and we're just roommates and we're just business partners and we spend all night watching Netflix, that rope between us just gets longer and longer and longer and longer. And then the kids are 5 and we have a bit more freedom and we're like, who are you again? And it's a bit harder to come back. So a lot of what I focus on is just trying to help people make sure the space, like that they hold on to that tether so that when there is more space, when there is more time, when there is a little bit less pressure on the nervous system, it's easier to dive in. And there's a ton you can do to have fun, naked, sexy fun times, even in the midst of all the chaos. There really is. And that can be creative about when you schedule sex. Not everyone has the freedom to do this, but playing hooky off work or doing it over a lunchtime when your kids are in care, if your kids are in care, is really helpful. Getting more comfortable or exploring why you feel uncomfortable. Like sometimes it's just about putting a lock on the door so that you're not worried anyone's going to walk in on you. I had friends who their parents kicked everyone out of the house at 2:00 every day. It was mom and dad's hour in the house. And the older the kids got,
I
like they
love
knew what was
that.
happening. But I
Love that.
also, again, we could do a whole other podcast on like, why do we need to hide the fact that we're sexual from our children, right? Like, I want
Because
my
as
kids.
a child, Sophia, I don't know what you were like when with you, but
Oh, I
parents
know.
do not have sex.
Right.
They
But it's
don't.
if we're talking about modeling respect, if we're talking about modeling consent. I mean, obviously we don't want our children watching certain parts of it, but and we all have our own comfort level, but how many children can say they actually saw their parents like model what a romantic, connected, loving, like physically loving relationship was, right? And while I might be like, ew, you're making out, like, ew, you actually kiss her when she leaves, like that shows me what I can expect in a relationship. And if I see my parents like never touch, and the only reason they're never touching is because they don't want to touch in front of me because they have some hang up about it. That's teaching me about, what I can expect in relationships. So there are lines there, of course, and everyone has their own comfort levels. But
And
sometimes
I
it's about
love,
challenging a bit.
yeah, and I love, Sophia, what you're talking about modeling as well. That is so true. And I'm very aware that we'll have to wrap this up very soon, and we'll just talk about the gold nuggets that you've actually talked about, that you've actually um, uncovered. But the other thing is religion has so much to do with it,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
very
I'm not going to
so.
go into it, but yeah, I'm just going to say that religion is a really huge way of how we have thought about sex and related with sex. And
Yeah.
that's all I'm going to say about that. And it's great that we're able to disassociate ourselves, not so much about, the connection to a spiritual way, but the dogma that religion actually plays on us on a societal level.
Mhm.
It's
I think
interesting.
I think it's important to understand the sociological background of all of the things that we do in our culture. Where does that come from? Why is it sitting there? Do I agree? Do I want to carry that forward in my family? Do I want that to be who I show up with as and carry, as the culture I create? And I think one of the interesting things that you said before was around the fun and intimacy. I think we get very caught up on sex as the pinnacle of intimacy, but it's only one aspect of intimacy. And I think that we need to remember that, especially during times when we are totally tapped out and totally tired or hormonally run ragged or whatever it might be, that intimacy can look like sitting watching Netflix holding hands. Intimacy can look like being in the kitchen and cooking together. Intimacy can be my husband still talks about a day a couple of years ago when he and I don't know, we cannot replicate this again, but he cut a mango out of the tree and he caught it, and for whatever reason that turned me on. I caught a pawpaw the other day. He's like, does this count? I'm like, no, it does not count. It's not the same.
But it's bigger, Philippa.
I heard that, but I caught it, not
size
him.
doesn't matter, right?
Right?
Well, maybe you were ovulating.
Right? And I probably was.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, like we you know, I think what we need to get to is this idea that intimacy is the goal. Being intimate, having fun together, having a relationship, whether it includes physical intercourse or not, at different stages in your life, it's going to look a bit different, and that's okay. But what is not negotiable is intimacy, and intimacy can look like having fun together, or just it. So I think it takes a lot of pressure off when we actually see that as the goal.
Yeah, we get so focused on the scripts, right? The sex is a penis in a vagina. Good sex is actually pleasure and vulnerability together.
Yeah.
Different P and V.
And it's not, sex is so much more.
Right.
And intimacy is like that being so familiar with that other person.
I learned it as into me you see, right?
Into me you see, yeah.
And the
I learned that off Michael
communication.
Myers.
I mean, honestly, I had a conversation with my partner the other day. You know, we've been in a phase where because we don't have sex very frequently, it doesn't last very long. And I was caught in a bit of a vortex around not wanting to communicate about that, or being afraid to communicate about that. Didn't want to let him down, didn't want to hurt his ego, blah, 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 blah. And I think he got brave enough to sort of be like, I know this hasn't been spectacular. What are we going to do about it? You know? And it was kind of that classic, like, you're so afraid the conversation is going to go terribly. And then when you finally do have the conversation, it just relieves all the pressure. Like you were saying, Pippa, it creates this different level of connection. And like, actually, we both got turned on by the conversation that we had and ended up having really great sex afterwards. So that is a classic moment of like communication enabled intimacy, which created a desire for more sexual connection, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, if we try to kind of sum a few things up in our last 10 minutes here, like, I think the biggest thing, if we're talking about the nervous system piece, you know, there's understanding the physical pieces, there's understanding the emotional pieces, but if we think about all that as it relates to the nervous system, what it means, like you were saying, Philippa, is that you're showing up frozen in certain moments, whether that's when your partner initiates, the transition to sex, the actual sexy time, if you're just lying there kind of frozen, not participating, or the debrief where you're frozen and you don't say anything about the experience, right? Or it can mean fighting about sex, or it can mean running away from it. And I've had moments where, you know, when we're ending up by accident doing somatic work, and I get this sensation of it's like a trauma will come up to the surface and my partner's doing something and I just want to like brush him off of me and run away. Like there's a huge like flight response that happens. So one of the first steps can be like noticing that in yourself, like where is the shutdown for you? For some of us, we can't even get past initiation. For some of us, we struggle to get from initiation to kind of doing the do, like that transition phase, I call it. And that can look like being stuck in your head and you're too hot, you're too cold, the sheets suck, like you just can't get in the moment. And then when you're there, you feel like you're taking too long, or the orgasm's not happening, or you're bored, or whatever it is. I think the other piece is in all of this, like finding a way to communicate and create that peace treaty of like, I need 2 weeks with no pressure for this, or I need 3 months with no pressure for this, or whatever it is, so that I can tune into myself and ask myself, like, what level of intimacy or touch or connection is going to support me right now? Because when it comes to the nervous system, we need to create the positive feedback loop instead of the negative one, right? So if people are stuck not having sex or having lackluster sex, they're stuck in a negative feedback loop where They don't want to do it. They force themselves to do it. They have a shitty time. Then their body remembers that. And the next time they go to do it, even if they might be keen the next time, your body is going, last time this was not so good. So it anticipates a not so good time. So it armors, it tightens, it contracts. Your muscles are tighter. Your blood flow is not moving, which means arousal is harder to make happen. It's exactly the opposite conditions you need for a good orgasm, which is relaxed, present awareness with focus. And so the more we can create low stakes, fun times that are positive and build a positive feedback loop where my body goes, oh yeah, that was good last time. We played strip poker and I had a great time. I'm willing to try that again. I'm willing to
So
try that again.
basically
I'm willing to try that
putting the
again.
fun into it. You know, the one interesting thing, and I love just to wrap up what we're talking about, is about the self-awareness, about communication, and about how if it's too hard to have that direct communication, do an abstract communication. I was reading about XYZ the other day. What do you think about this? About introducing all of that. That's a really, really great tip. But also about it being positive, about it just unstripping, no pun intended, actually pun very well intended to be unstripping, and and just having fun with it all and realizing that there is a season for everything in our lives. Life changes all the time, and the transition into motherhood is the biggest transition we will have in our lifetimes. End of story.
Can I just
It's
also
massive.
Can
Yeah.
I just also make it really, for some women, the fact that their partner is now a father actually also impacts them. If they've experienced sexual trauma from their father and their partner all of a sudden becomes a father, he's no longer safe. In their unconscious, he's no longer safe because he's now a father and fathers aren't safe. So there are so many things that go on in our unconscious that we actually need to be willing to explore. And that's where, if we can honor ourselves to just listen to what our body's telling us and take the time to understand, talk to somebody who's most people would never know that's even a thing, but the fact that we work in this trauma space means we've seen those things before and we can sometimes make the connection for people. So if you're experiencing these things, I would encourage you to reach out and talk to someone who can come at it from a different perspective, who has some knowledge that maybe you don't have, who can help you unpack what it is that might be going on for you. Because some of these things are so deep in our unconscious and we don't know it's even possible. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Totally.
So, unpacking that with somebody can make the world of difference. We don't have to do this alone, people.
So again, Philippa, what are we talking about? We're just about
Do the
every podcast, like,
work.
do the work. Become
Do the
self-aware.
work.
Learn about communication.
Yeah.
It is the key. And I've lived it. You've lived it, Philippa and Sofia. You have lived it as well. And we've seen the benefits from it. Exactly.
Yes. And like last note I'll say on all of that is my biggest pet peeve in all of this is how much we frame women as broken.
Oh,
and
yes.
how if she just gets fixed, then everything will be fine, right? And there are elements of that for sure. If we're talking about birth trauma, physical trauma, things like that, there are certain things that I need to do on my own journey that my partner can't do for me. But sex is relational, and that nervous system safety needs to also come from our partner. They're a huge part of creating it, about understanding where we're at, about learning somatic healing. I mean, I've got birth trauma and we were having sex and my partner found a painful spot in my body and I asked him to keep pressure and I breathed and I had a huge cry and a complete release of this thing, right? Like had he not known what the heck was going on, he would have been like, we're having sex, you're crying. Like, what is happening here? But like, that's a thing because sex is a really powerful way of releasing that trauma from the body, which I mean, is a whole other topic, but you are not broken. There are reasons your libido is not working as you would like it to. And there are things that both you and your partner can do to negotiate and talk and learn together about how to create the sex life that you want. And that's really the biggest message I have for people.
Beautiful.
Amazing. Thank you
Beautiful.
so much for sharing your wisdom with us, Sophia. Thank you again, Pippa, for being a beautiful co-host and for leading this conversation in such a lovely direction. It was beautiful. We do have to say goodbye, but we will put all of the stuff in the show notes for how people can reach out to you and see what you're doing. Yeah, what a
Perfect.
wonderful conversation. Thank you so very much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
ladies.
thank you, Sophia.
Don't forget to subscribe and follow along, and please share this. Put it out there in the world so that other women know, and other men know what they can do to help improve their relationship. Talk to you next week.